friends, it's me, Sally Scientist, and I'm gonna do a sink or float experiment. What's that, you ask? Well, I have this big bucket of water, and I'm gonna put things in it like this pencil and this screwdriver to see if it'll float or sink. So, what do you guys think? So, before I put something in the water, we're gonna do something called make a hypothesis. You guys are gonna tell me if you think this pencil will sink or float. And then I'll write down what you guys think it's gonna do. I'll put it in the water, and then we'll observe what actually happens. And we'll compare what we thought it would happen and what actually happened. So, let's get to it. So first on our list, I have a crystal. Do you think this crystal will sink or float? I think it's going to sink. So I wrote down that my crystal is going to sink. So I put an S for sink for short. So, would you look at that? It sunk right into the water. Awesome, I was right. So I'm gonna put another S. Now this hair clip, I think, it's hard to say. It could sink, it could float. Maybe it'll float. Maybe it'll float. I'm gonna write down F for float. Now let's put it in. No, it didn't float. It sunk. So I was actually wrong with my hypothesis. I thought because it was really thin, it might float. But I guess it was denser than the water. Now let's see. Now this hair tie. I think the hair tie is gonna float. So let me put F for float. Let's see. It did. It's floating. It floated. What about this Jolly Rancher? I think the Jolly Rancher is going to sink. Let's find out. It did. Now next is the screwdriver. What do you guys think? Do you think it's gonna sink or float? I think it's gonna sink. Let's find out. Would you look at that? Guys, you see what just happened? The metal part of the screwdriver sank while the handle is floating. What? I've never seen anything like that before. So I guess it can sink and float? Interesting. Let's try. Next, we have this box of mints. I really hope it'll float because I do not want these mints to get wet. So I'm gonna put that in, it floats. It does! Yes, cool. F for float. Now what about this cute little heart box? I think it will float. What do you guys think? Let's find out. It did. Wonderful. F for float. Now this pencil, do you guys think it's gonna sink or float? I think it's gonna float. So I'm gonna put an F. And yes, it did float. Wonderful. Now the next we have this lid. Do you guys think it's going to sink or float? And why? I think it's gonna float because it looks like it'd be really light. So the lid, F for float. Now let's take some of these things out here. Would you look at that? It floats. The next one we have is a tennis ball. Now, what do you guys think about this tennis ball? Do you think it's gonna sink or float? Just to give you guys a little hint, do you wanna know what's inside of here? Air. There's air inside this tennis ball. And that is why I think it's going to float. Because the amount of air in something can make it less dense. Wow, it's floating. Wonderful, we were right. Now the next one we have is this heart jewel. I think it's going to, I don't know. What do you guys think? Yeah, I think it's gonna sink. Ah, and it did. Cool. The next one we have is this toothpick. Now, what do you guys think is gonna happen? Do you think it'll sink or float? I think it's gonna float because the pencil was able to float and it's made of wood, and so is this toothpick. So I think it's gonna do the same thing. Let's find out. So I had to break it in half because it was too long, wouldn't fit in the bowl. Let's put it in. Wow, would you look at that? It floats. And the last thing we have for our experiment is this quarter. What is your hypothesis? Do you think it's going to sink or float? I think it's going to sink. Let's put it in here. Look at that. It sank all the way down to the bottom. Sink. So next what we're going to do is we're going to make tally marks for how many items we're able to sink, float, or both. So the lid. Did the lid sink or float? Yeah, it was able to float. So we'll do one tally mark for float. What about the tennis ball? Yes, it was able to float too. And the hair clip? Yeah, the hair clip sunk. What about my box of mints? Yes, that was able to float too. What about the screwdriver? Yeah, my screwdriver sunk. Wait a minute. What about my screwdriver? Remember the metal part sank and the handle was able to float. So we're gonna do both. My hair tie? Yeah, it floated. My pencil, do you remember what happened? Yes, that was able to float too. So this means, the line, remember, means that we're doing 5. I wrote 1, 2, 3, 4 tally marks, and then the 5th tally mark, I drew straight across. What about my little heart? Yeah, that sunk. And my quarter? Yeah, that sunk too. My Jolly Rancher? Yep, it sunk. And my crystal? Yep, it sunk. What about my heart box? Yep, that was able to float. And my toothpick? Yep, I was able to float as well. Now let's count how many we had for each one. So the items that sunk were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we don't even have to count all of them to know that. We already know that it's 5 because the line through the tally marks. So 5. We know that that means 5. So why don't we add these together? We have 5, 6, 7. 7 items were able to float. Wonderful. Now what about both? Which items did both? They were able to sink and float. Yeah, just one. Awesome. So 5 items were able to sink, 7 items were able to float, and 1 did both. Which category has the most items in it? Sink has 5, float has 7, and both has 1. That's right, float. Which category had the least? 1, 5, or 7? That's right, 1. Well, dolphins, thank you so much for doing this experiment with me. You guys have a great day. Bye.